Hi, welcome into Sound Sense, building a home-based recording studio. I'm the Mike in michaelbearvoice.com. Last week on this project, I completed the pocket sash wall framing, and I roughly fit the window sashes themselves. In fact, they came from my very little shop in the basement where I built them, and that is where we're going to go today and leave this room behind for a short while. I initially had thought that I would use a fully dimensioned 2x4 lumber for the sashes, since I had salvaged some very nice edge grain fir 2x4s from the demolition of this room. Edge grain fir, quarter sawn, is my favorite of all woods, and I was surprised to find these 2x4s in this room. But of course, back then, way back then, they were just 2x4s. They're absolutely the kind of 2x4 you will never ever see again on your lumber pile at your local building supply store. You have to go to a specialty lumber store for that. Incidentally, this is why old house demolitions attract a lot of interest from people who understand the value of the old timber that was used in their construction. It's like gold these days, old timber like that, and if you know how to make use of it, you're ahead. It's very, very valuable. The blessed day has arrived and I can start working on my window sashes, thank God. It's been a long time getting here. And I'm using, guess what? For flooring that I pulled up. I've been making great use out of that. There's a lot of mileage in that flooring, and I'm traveling every bit of it. The furnace is kicked in. For me, there's nothing like being in the shop where my furnace happens to be and having it kick in, and it's nice and warm and cozy, and it's I don't know, it's comforting. Anyway, I'm trying to find the grain direction in this wood that I need to dress up just a little bit before I laminate it, before I glue it. It's important to do so that you feed the wood in the direction of the cutter, which is that away. If you do feed it against the grain, then it's just going to pull it up and shred it. Once I find my grain direction, I'm looking for where the grain rises. And once I find that, I'll mark this with an arrow, and I'll stack it on my planer in the direction it's meant to be fed, and I'll run it through, and everybody's happy, and Robert is your father's brother. You'll notice here that there's a ridge that runs through this piece of wood, which tells me that I have a chip in my blade. It doesn't take a forensic pathologist to match the chip in the blade to the shape of this ridge on my wood. It tells me that my blades need attention. So what I need to do is I just need to pass these through at exactly the same setting again, avoiding the place where the blades are chipped, so I can get that smooth finish, which would allow me to laminate. What I've done is I've cut it down into sections. This is a 2-inch by 1.5 inches. Now what I've done is I've laminated already, glued them up, laminated, and pinned them. So I have several pieces of this, long enough for I need 4 stiles, which are the uprights, and I have 4 rails, which are the cross pieces. And they're all going to be this dimension. I need to cut these down to size a little bit, and then I can start shaping them on my table saw with a taper jig that I've built to provide a taper. Now the taper is going to look something like this. If I do it right, and I hope to do it right, the taper, I exaggerated here, but it's going to be a taper that looks something like that. But to do this, I need to set up my dado, and I didn't have until today an actual dado insert for my table saw, which makes it unsafe. So I finally got around to making some inserts. This is the first one I made, and it is a 0 clearance insert, and it's just made out of 1/4-inch plywood. You know, just as I discovered that air compressors and pneumatic nailers would change my life, I discovered that making 0 clearance inserts for my table saw was really very simple, and I don't really know why I didn't do it years ago. I thought it was a lot more complicated, but really I happen to have a piece of 1/4-inch plywood on hand. I traced the template from the original steel insert, and I used a straight bit in the router to carve a shallow rabbet around the insert. A little fine-tuning with sandpaper, punched some countersink holes for the machine screws, and there you have it. The fun part was pretending I was in the wood shop on the Deep Space Star Freighter Nostromo, and it was showtime for the alien. Yeah, this is the sort of thing that can happen when you're alone in the shop all day. So this is the dado insert that I made for my blade. It has a 1-inch, exactly 1-inch cutout right here. You can see it there. It's like those masks they used to wear at those costume balls, you know. It was always like, what, you can't figure out who that is? For God's sakes, it's just a mask over their eyes, right? But nevertheless, I could put a little stick on that and wander around at a cocktail party in Venice, several centuries ago, or perhaps in revolutionary France, just before the guillotine fell. The challenge I now have is I have to figure out how to set up a jig, and to figure out a jig for my fence on my table saw, I'll put a dado blade in my saw, and I need to rip the rabbeted channel that's going to take the pane of glass in each of these sashes. What I have to do is figure out the angle that will traverse 38 inches, which is the height of the window. It'll be a fairly slight angle, but it'll be an angled glass nevertheless, which will help to remove some of that sympathetic resonance, which is what causes sound to come through windows. It's not going to eliminate it entirely, but at certain frequencies it certainly will. It deadens the airspace. Well, that was a somewhat vexing afternoon spent trying to make this taper cut. As is the case in most things that I do when I haven't done them before, I'd like to try and figure them out. And there's a reasonable chance that I can, usually. This one was just a challenge for me. I could not figure out what I was doing wrong, because wrong I was doing. It was pretty clear to me that I was missing something really fundamental, and I didn't know what it was. I tried changing the angle of the piece of stock, a piece of wood that I had applied against my fence. I had wedges in there, a half inch, inch and a half even, trying everything to try and get that cut to taper. The relationship between the cutting face and the fence didn't change, and it took me a while to realize that. I eventually threw up my hands and I broke down and I went to YouTube and I did a very quick search on tablesaw tapering jig or something. And sure enough, first hit, as soon as I saw it, I went, aha! The light bulb went bing! And I understood exactly what it was that I had missed. What I had done essentially was just I'd built a tapered fence and I was running my stock across it and not understanding why it was that I was coming up with a perfectly good rabbet. Not an angled rabbet that I needed, but a perfectly good rabbet nevertheless. I need to build a small jig like that that has the angle that I want. It's got one flat side, of course, and then I attach my stock to that and I move the jig and the wood as a unit against the square fence. And that will change the relationship between the cutting head, the surface, the bite, you might see, the table saw blade. It will definitely change as I run the tapered jig across the blade, using the fence as a square fence. So it made perfect sense. I mean, like a lot of things, it's quite simple when you see it and you go, oh, geez, why didn't I think of that? I just didn't think of it. I knew there was something I was missing and it was making me nuts. And then, of course, you dig in and you think, why can't I figure this out? I'm a grown-ass adult. I mean, I've been around the block a few times. I can get a little obstinate. My wife, and in most circles, probably would recognize that as simply being pig-headed. And that's probably true. But yeah, thank you, YouTube. Now I can build the actual jig and I shouldn't have any troubles from here. I lost some time, but I learned a couple of really valuable lessons about tapered jigs and humility. Having cut the rabbets on one side of the blade of the dado blade setup, I now have to move the fence. I need to move this fence to the other side. I made this mistake once already, in fact, which is why I've had to remake some of these pieces, to be honest. What I failed to appreciate was the fact that the rabbets on either side, because they're tapers, they are perfect. They are mirror images. And what I had done was I had cut my stiles on the same side of the fence. So the tapers went one way. When I went to make the pieces together, left and right stiles, of course, they didn't match. Oops. Had I been cutting straight rabbets, it wouldn't have mattered, of course, because I'm just doing a straight vertical rabbet. I had to manufacture 2 more stiles, actually, throw out the old ones, that I could then cut on the other side of the blade and then cut the taper on that side. So when I put them together in opposition, they will mate properly. Does that explain it? I've confused even myself, which is why I actually made the mistake in the first place. So I'm just in a holding pattern. I've glued my first window up and I've clamped it up with my strapping clamps there. And I'm going to give it 20 minutes or so. Then I'm going to take the clamps off and I'm going to drive a couple of 2-inch, well, not a couple, more than a couple. I'm going to use some 2-inch 16-gauge brad nails and I'm just going to pin them on corners. Just to give it a bit of, just a little bit more strength perhaps. It's square. Yeah, we'll find out. The glass is just going to fit. That's the important part. So once again, I'm just waiting 20 minutes or so for this frame to set up. It's been glued and clamped. And then it's starting to finish. So that's going to be sanding them down roughly and put a coat of primer on them. And at that point, then I'm going to set the glass in. And to do that, I'm going to lay in a bead of silicone. And then I will put the glass sort of embedded in that. And to hold that down, I'm going to use this handy product, which is I should actually do this the way that they do it unnaturally. It's an unnatural grip, a TV grip. Push points by Samaco. You push them, you'll see the point. Anyway, push points are very handy. Glazier's helpers. They hold the glass in place. Normally, I would then put a strip glazing putty on an exterior window. I certainly would, using glazing compound. In this case, I'm not certain what I'm going to do with that. I might just put a strip of a quarter round, a small molding strip in there to just give it some additional support. I might use some glazier's compound. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do there. Glazier's putty. But at least I'll have the glass in, and it's going to start to look like a window sash. And I could move on, you know, thankfully. I'm back in my room. It feels like I've been in my shop for a long time making those window sashes, and I really was actually. But the sashes are built, and now I'm ready to put them in. I've done sort of a dry run, a dry fit, and I know that they're going to work. On the window sashes themselves, they've been finished, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a furniture wax. I've had a furniture wax in my shop for years, and I thought I'm just going to put that. It forms a sort of a hard shell. It'll be a wax in the bottom, which will just help to, you know, slide along there, I think, a little better as well. Because they have to stand up for a couple of years, because once I frame them in and once I build my wall and do my trim, those windows will be captive. So I have to make damn sure that when I put the windows in, that outside pane of glass is clean. Because if there's a spot, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to clean it. I'll have to climb out the window on each side and come in from out. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to worry about that. I just want to get the goddamn things in. So the way the window works now, it's going to slide in and just snug into the underside of the slope. And it leaves me proud, but not that proud that it gets in the way of the view. So when these windows are in the open position and they're being recessed into the wall, they'll only stick out a little bit. Enough for me to put a handle on them, because I obviously have to have a handle. But I think it's going to work, and I'm amazed that it's going to work. Now, he said that, you know, before he's actually done it. And it wouldn't be the first time I've messed something up, but I'm feeling confident. And for good reason, as it turns out, I didn't mess up. Next time out on SoundSense, we're going to finish the framing on this window wall, and we're going to start in on the drywall. That's next time on SoundSense.